Welcome back to the NJCPA Tech Talk podcast, brought to you by the Emerging Technologies Interest Group. And we are back here today, episode 4. I'm your host, Dr. Sean Stein-Smith. I do a lot of work in the blockchain, crypto asset, IT space, anything linked, accounting, finance, IT stuff. I'm there. Now, the guest of honor today, episode 4 of the NJCPA Tech Talk podcast, Melissa Dardani, who is a fraud analyst, fraud combatant, fraud expert, also is a entrepreneur, cannabis expert, and is the MD of her own firm. So now I will toss it to her for a brief introduction of herself and her firm.
Thanks, Sean. Thanks for having me. I'm really excited to be here with you and to share some of the really exciting projects that you and I have been working on through the NJCPA, our respective interest groups, mine being the Cannabis Interest Group, and of course, yours being the Emerging Technology Interest Group. As Sean mentioned, my name is Melissa Dardani, and I'm the founder and owner of MD Advisory Services. We're a boutique accounting firm that really focuses in prevention, detection, and deterrence of fraud. As a part of that, investigations is really our sweet spot. So we do both historic investigations, as well as performance investigations. My expertise in cannabis overlaps with that performance category, where we help clients get their accounting systems up and running in this emerging industry, help them deal with some of the early growing pains from the financial perspective. And of course, as I would with any client, ensure that there's proper internal controls and safeguards to protect the company's value for the clients that I work with. So that's a little bit about me. And again, I'm really thrilled to be here and to be talking about this. This is a topic I'm so passionate about.
Awesome stuff. And so you know what, to take advantage of your expertise here today, I did want to start off by really trying to sort of ask you about, how do you fight fraud in a work from home economic landscape, right? Because all of us have been off-site at home. Some of us are trying to get back to the office, but as a individual and as a firm that tries to focus on trying to uncover fraud and trying to help firms put the right controls in place at the firm to help combat fraud themselves, how has that changed in a off-site working first outlook?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's really been an interesting challenge for the large part of 2020 and now going into 2021. We haven't had the ability to be on site, which is really it really makes all the difference in terms of trying to uncover bad acts, particularly thinking about some of the items that you accidentally stumble across when you're working in someone's office. You kind of lose that ability. Being so focused in fraud and trying to uncover things that people are intentionally trying to keep away from you, having that slight advantage really does make all the difference. So it's been challenging in that regard, having to work completely remote. Some of the workarounds that have done well for me is, communication is key in any engagement in a remote environment. That becomes tenfold more important, making sure that I'm in constant contact with my client, who is really serving as my eyes and ears on the ground in this environment, again, absent my being able to be there. There's that component of it. And then, of course, there's just the collection of data, which is immensely more difficult in a remote environment. So something that I was actually utilizing even before being remote in an attempt to keep travel to a minimum, or, in the off chance that you have to collect something post site visit and it doesn't make sense to go back every time, is remote collection procedures via Zoom, our normal tools that we use for exactly for interfacing, just like we're doing right now, and using screen share to facilitate that type of work has been incredibly helpful. In some cases, even, requesting remote control and working together with my client that way. So it's very different and it's very challenging. But I think what it has taught me, much like many other businesses, is that there's a lot that can be done remote that perhaps we never thought of before. At the same time, there are some things that just really have to be done in person. Interviews is a big one. Interviewing particularly some of the persons of interest, witnesses, less intense interviews can certainly be done via video conference, just like we're doing right now. But when it comes to time for the more sensitive interviews, I really do prefer to be in person, to be able to read the body language of the individual. When you and I are talking, we're limited to this box that we put ourselves in. Yep, exactly. So from that perspective, you're missing a lot, not being in person. So it's a great question, and it's a challenge that has been very interesting to try and overcome. And we're definitely looking forward to, hopefully in the near future, a time where we're back in person, at least to some extent. But COVID will definitely change the way that that we work, I think, for the better.
Yeah, and so to try to sort of pop the hood on a few of those comments, are you actually doing more conversation, having more interaction with your external clients being off-site than you would on-site, or have those touch points just sort of altered in terms of having calls, being on FaceTime, Zoom, all the rest, as opposed to being in person, or has the overall quantity also increased?
I tend to be very hands-on as it is. Like I said, communication
Okay.
is key. It always has been for me. So in the remote environment, it's only really amplified.
Hmm.
At this point in time, I have clients who I've only dealt with virtually because they were onboarded at a time when it wasn't safe to go out and have that initial site visit. So communication has really been at the center of everything that we do, even more so
Hmm.
than it already was pre-pandemic. Something interesting about the forensic world is you want to limit the amount of time you spend chasing false positives. And the best way to
Okay.
do that is by constant communication. So it has really, yeah, it has been interesting, and it has
Hmm.
only, the communication factor has only increased in light of everything that's been going on.
Hmm. So do you think that after we try to get back to being back on site in the office, back to normal, do you think that these current sort of workarounds to conduct some of the fraud sort of data activities are going to be there permanently, or are we going to shift back to trying to do uh, trying to do things the exact same way that we had?
I think in very rare circumstances would an engagement, a fraud investigation be done completely 100% remote,
Hmm.
especially when you're in a bit of a contentious situation. And the reason for that is that the data collection phase of a fraud investigation is just the most important thing. If you are getting data from your client and you're relying on that data to perform whatever procedures you've determined are appropriate with your client, then that becomes useless if the data that you've received is no good. So I have had instances in my career where we've requested data from a client and we were working in a remote environment, and the data that has come to me had clearly not been say a direct export from whatever accounting system that the personnel was using. It had been exported at some point in time. It looked like it was modified as a work paper, and then that was the product that was sent to me. So not being able to supervise the data collection really hinders your ability to determine the quality and the veracity of the data that you're dealing with. So in that particular example, it was just that the individual working had sent me a work paper and hadn't thought anything of it. It wasn't necessarily a nefarious act, but who's to say that if the person who's doing the data collection for you is involved with the scheme that you're investigating, they export the data and they modify it in, say, CSV or Excel format, and then they send it to you, this becomes problematic. So overseeing that data collection is by far one of the most important things. And to the extent that it can be done with a level of reliability remote, great, but I definitely think there's incredible value to overseeing that process in person. And then similarly, stumbling across things on accident. I have been fortunate in that some of the clients that I work with are very curious themselves. And as I said, they're the boots on the ground for me. They're acting in such a way that I think is very intelligent and thoughtful, and they're treating the investigation as the work that I'm doing as an extension of themselves. But every client is different, and this is not always going to be the case. So it's really a case-by-case determination. And of course, if you can spare your client the expense of having to travel, especially if it's somewhere far away, then I think by all means, that's the way to go.
Makes sense.
Without, of course, sacrificing quality.
Obviously, right? Because if we're doing a fraud project or a fraud engagement, I guess is the right word. How is that different from a audit in terms of the actual work processes being done? I mean, obviously there are some differences, right? Because if you're doing a fraud project or a fraud engagement, then there has to be some sort of idea, right? Or some thought that there's fraud happening, right? Or are the fraud processes and the audit processes pretty close? I don't know. So
yeah, no,
I'm asking the expert here.
This is a great question. I think that in terms of the skepticism, there's definitely an overlap between audit and a forensic engagement, but the underlying difference is the purpose and what you're being called in to do. So, an audit, as you know, is not designed to detect fraud. The audit is designed to detect material misstatement in the financial statements, and it's commonly understood that if the fraud is caught by an audit, chances are that fraud has already grown into something quite material that the client unfortunately is now pursuing recoveries of very sizable amounts. What we're doing when we're called in for a forensic engagement is typically targeting a specific area. So we don't have, we have a lot of creativity with regards to sample sizes. For example, if we're doing a forensic audit, which takes the concept of an audit, applies it to a specific area of the business, and works accordingly. So perhaps you don't know exactly what you're looking for on the onset. You know that the client has identified a particular area, say payables, or just disbursements in general, as a potential area for fraud. You might do a forensic audit, and again, there's some creativity with how to come up with a sample size that suits your needs. If there were particular vendors or particular invoices that were flagged as suspect, then of course you're going to design your engagement around those. So there's definitely some similarities in that regard. Sometimes you get called in for a forensic engagement and quite frankly, the client can't point you to where the problem might be. They know from a 1,000-foot overview, a 10,000-foot overview, that there's a problem because their metrics are not where they expect them to be, but they don't know how to begin diagnosing where that problem might be. this requires a more macro analysis, I call it, and some data analytics from a high level point of view, where you're picking apart areas of the company's financials to try and identify outliers in that way. And then upon figuring out the area of interest to you in that phase, then you kind of move into the audit or the more investigatory procedures.
Gotcha.
So it's very interesting. The reason that I love this work is it really combines my knowledge of accounting, being a CPA coming from that background, with data analytics, and using them together. Some of the tools that are on the rise that I'm sure you're aware of are really, really exciting with regards to being able to process and analyze a large amount of data in a really small amount of time, even for a smaller boutique firm like myself. The tools, some of these open source tools even really make it easy for us to be able to, again, do a lot with a little bit of resources. And it's a very exciting time to be a fraud examiner.
I can imagine, although I don't know how good that is to be a fraud expert and to also have it be a exciting time. Just, for the overall firms that are involved, but obviously excellent for you, right?
Forensic accountants thrive in tragedy.
There we go. Optimism. Love it. Upbeat stuff here today. NJCPA TechTalk podcast. So speaking of upbeat, right, and trying to thrive, how has it been starting your firm right now during COVID? How has that played out? Has it been harder? Probably harder, but how has it sort of been trying to start, grow, and build out your own firm right now?
My pandemic baby, as I endearingly
baby.
call it. Yeah, it has been really exciting to transition into this stage in my career in general. The fact that it's happening during the pandemic didn't really, I don't know that it would be any less exciting or stressful as it would be if we were living in normal times, again, with the only difference being the ability to be on site with my clients. I think there was an interesting opportunity in the market for accountants, law firms alike, in the wake of the pandemic, because you see companies, especially during 2020, that were dealing with cash flow concerns. And the government obviously was able to bridge a lot of those concerns via their PPP and other provisions of the CARES Act. But what I kind of saw was a shifting opportunity for businesses. First and foremost, fraud will be more prevalent, because it's not because there's an uptick per se, but certainly because people are paying much closer attention to their cash flow in times of crisis. So when this is happening, certainly anomalies that may have gone undetected or were deemed immaterial or just wouldn't have even been given a second look in a more prosperous period are now coming under the microscope in light of COVID. So plus, you have it at the individual level, a lot more financial pressure. The United States was quite unique. Of course, individuals did get some amount of relief, but the majority of our financial relief actually went through the business owners. And the idea was that through the PPP program, you would keep people employed, and those government issued funds would filter down to the individuals who needed them. Whether or not that's what happened is a little bit beyond this discussion, but I think certainly you see an uptick in financial pressure, unemployment being on the rise, poverty at an all-time high in the United States. I think there's definitely financial pressure, which is a key component of our fraud triangle. So in addition to the uptick in instances of fraud, you have companies that are trying to find a more affordable service provider. And being a boutique firm, obviously, we are quite different in terms of our pricing than a Big Four accounting firm might be. So it was these kinds of things, I think, that really were all going through my mind when I was weighing out the risk reward of taking this step at this point in time. And, I'm an accountant, very conservative by nature. So I would not have done it if I didn't think that it was a worthwhile venture. And it's really been just the most exciting, thrilling period of my life so far, my career so far. And I'm looking forward to seeing where this goes, where this takes me.
Excellent to hear. And so if you had to give one piece of advice, one piece of sort of guidance to a CPA who's considering starting their own practice in any area, right? Be it fraud, be it tech services, whatever. If you had to give one piece of advice or sort of one thing that you wish you had known back 12 months ago, 18 months ago, what would that be?
I think for me, it has really always been about being in the heat of things, figuring out where the hot topic areas are, figuring out what the appetite.
Hot topics are right here, Melissa. Hot topics are
and
right
here
here.
we are.
Right
Exactly.
here. Yep.
Exactly. I feel like I'm talking in a mirror. Yeah, I think especially if one of those areas aligns with your passion. Cannabis, for example, is an area that I've been very I have always advocated for from a CPA financial perspective, right?
Sure.
It's not taking a stance for or against the legalization of cannabis, but it's the fact that these businesses are up and running under state regulations in our country and are being what I perceive to be unfairly discriminated against because of the federal and state disparity that exists because of the Controlled Substances Act. So for me, it was like, okay, here's an area of the business world where companies and business owners are really in need of a CPA, the guidance and wisdom offered by a CPA. So that was immediately an area that I wanted to get involved with. Technology, I'm a member of your interest group. I think it's just something that if you're not on board with the latest trends in technology, you're going to become obsolete as a professional. So pursuing these things that are both very relevant and also things that you're passionate about, this is, I think, a recipe for success for CPAs and professionals in general. And then I guess I would also just say relationships. This is a relationship business, and those are the most important things, some of the most important assets that your business can possibly have. Nurture them and just find ways to help people. I think if you're following what you believe to be the right thing, and you're doing work that you're passionate about, you're helping people, you're adding value. This is, what more can you want in a career? This is why I love accounting. I'm an advocate for the profession. I think it really offers, there's no end to what it offers to people who are involved in it.
I concur. Absolutely. There is a tremendous amount and breadth of opportunity for anybody who's in public accounting, B&I, nonprofit policy. There's a opening and a opportunity for anybody with really any interest. So it's a awesome area. So so speaking of cannabis, what's going on right now in NJ with cannabis? Because I've heard that it's going to be legalized, but is it only for certain people or certain use cases, or is it for everybody? I'm just not quite sure.
Yeah, so we're fully legal. We obviously had the ballot measure in November of 2020 that passed, and then most recently the bill was signed by Governor Murphy several months later into 2021 now, that got passed. But what that effectively does is it legalizes cannabis, and it paves the way for an adult use commercial market here in New Jersey. Currently, there are medicinal operators up and running. This legislation and whatever guidance and further rules are issued by the Cannabis Regulatory Commission, following this legislation really is the framework for the commercial cannabis market here in New Jersey. So it's very exciting because we do have a medicinal market. There is hopefully going to be a much shorter runway time to get operators up and running and open for adult use sales. As of right now, this is not the case, but I think there are, it's only a matter of time before this happens. So that's very exciting. There is still this federal state disparity, right? So because cannabis is legal in New Jersey, doesn't change the classification of cannabis under the Controlled Substances Act, the same issue that Colorado, California, and all other states with an adult use market have been dealing with. Classification of cannabis as a Schedule I controlled substance under Controlled Substances Act makes it federally illegal and creates a whole array of issues for business operators. This is, again, where as a CPA, it's great to be able to be following these issues as they develop and advising clients accordingly. Unfortunately, a lot of the real reform has to happen at the federal level. This classification of cannabis is the problem. The MORE Act is the Democrats' response to this ongoing problem and is really focused around not creating a commercial cannabis industry, but creating a environment where the social justice and social equity pieces are addressed so that historically underserved communities and those that have been most impacted by the war on drugs are no longer being impacted by a substance, again, that has been deemed legal by a number of states in the US. So there's some exciting developments. Democrats having control of the House and the Senate is obviously very exciting. But of course, with all of the buzz about the filibuster and how much support the MORE Act or the Safe Banking Act have, is really where all the questions lie. So it will be very interesting to keep following these legislation, the pending legislation, and see where it goes.
And so from what I can hear, there does not seem to be any sort of firm timeline for when this resolution or this bill could be passed or to be brought to a vote or even to a committee vote. So I did want to ask though, just to add some extra sort of background here. So in terms of where cannabis falls into, where it's sort of classified, it's a Schedule sort of 1 item, correct?
Yeah.
Okay, so then what other items are on that category with it?
So Schedule I are substances that are deemed without any medicinal use. So,
Okay.
And the way that the Controlled Substances Act worked is the Schedule I is the highest schedule. So these are the really heavy substances that it's very interesting to me that they make this assertion and they throw cannabis among cocaine and substances of this nature, again, with no medicinal use, so not prescription drugs, which have their own issues in terms of addiction and so forth. But they throw them into this mix, and meanwhile we have however many states that have said for medicinal purposes, this will be allowed. So that there's a bit of irony there in the classification of cannabis, but it's something that there has just been no success with getting it removed from that scheduling.
And I've always found that extremely interesting, that it's up there with all of the other sort of really bad items out there. And I do think, one, that also is going to complicate how quickly, right, individual states, individual entrepreneurs can actually get up and running, offering legal cannabis options, right, to adults in compliance with all of the rules and all the rest. I would say that really, to your point, that federal state difference has to be fixed first in order to unlock the entire cannabis market.
Yeah, and I think this is really epitomized when you're talking about the 280E issue. 280E has been commonly referred to as a penalty against a cannabis business because it is imposed as a result of the classification as a controlled one, a Schedule 1 controlled substance. And as a result, these taxpayers that are operating in this industry are paying 60, 70, 80% effective tax rates. It is a monetary hurdle that these businesses have to jump over in order to be successful in this industry. And I think it makes it very, very difficult for a startup, for a individual who doesn't have deep pockets, but perhaps wants to get involved in the industry, or a group of individuals. It makes it very, very difficult under the current structure.
No, and I mean, it's a very interesting, very fast growing area. And I do know that there are some excellent articles right now up on njcpa.org, co-authored by the two of us, talking on this exact same issue in the crypto cannabis article series. So there are two up. We have a third one due up soon, and a upcoming article in the print issue of NJCPA magazine, which is going to be due out come June. So to try to wrap up our conversation here today, are there any final thoughts, advice, tips that you would give anybody out there trying to advise clients in any area that is fast moving, fast evolving, cannabis, IT, or any fraud services?
Yeah, I think the underlying thought that comes to mind, you and I have talked a bit about this offline, the 6 Ps, right? Prior proper planning prevents poor performance.
There we go.
So as a CPA, again, we are very uniquely positioned to be helping our clients who are in these emerging industries. Take cannabis as an example. You may have groups, teams, individuals that want to get involved in the industry that are on, they have a fixed amount of money that they're able to invest into it. The last thing that you would want to do is send your client down a path that they potentially can't afford. So having those really honest conversations, those difficult conversations, are not possible unless you do that kind of groundwork, to the planning portion of it. So I think, yeah, my underlying thought here is that we as CPAs are just so uniquely positioned, I hate to keep saying that, to assist these emerging industries. We have the financial literacy skills in our toolkit. We have the technology and the understanding of processes and systems, the importance of those processes and systems, point to finish, right? Or in cannabis, as they call it, seed to sale. You need to have all of these things, all of these pieces in place. And by the way, for cannabis industry, it's not just recommended. These things are required, or it seems that based on the way the legislation is written, will be required and have been required in past applications. You have to have this stuff mapped out. They're not going to award a license to somebody who doesn't essentially have, your business has to exist on paper, more or less, if you're not already an industry operator. You have to have a complete picture of what this business is going to look like and how every piece of it is going to work, and how, again, seed to sale, if you're vertically integrated, or if you're working in a smaller piece of the supply chain, from start to finish has to be ironed out. So we're just really uniquely positioned to do that. And of course, working in conjunction with other parties. In the cannabis industry, you might have somebody who's specifically doing the application writing. You might have a lawyer involved, certainly a CPA, a real estate agent, perhaps a lobbyist, or a community expert. So there's really a gamut of professionals that you want to have in your corner when you're setting up your application. But I think we offer something very unique to our clients, and it always feels really good when you're kind of able to give that advice and take pride in being a trusted advisor, and somebody that helps their clients sleep at night and know that their operations are in good hands. And of course, from a financial perspective, being on top of their operations and monitoring performance to make sure that they're maximizing their investments, and what they're getting out is worth it in terms of what they're putting in. So it's really very exciting. I cannot say enough how much I love this profession.
And excellent points right there. And I think that that's an excellent way to wrap up our conversation here right now. But I am going to have to ask you to come back on to help keep us updated on cannabis, fraud, entrepreneurial CPA, outlook, and all the rest. So thank you again so much for being on episode 4 of the NJCPA Tech Talk podcast.
Happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. And now just to sort of wrap up right here, if you were interested in finding out more, sign up for the NJCPA Tech Talk podcast in your favorite podcasting app. You can also catch us on YouTube at youtube.com/NJCPA. Watch online at njcpa.org/techtalk. And for all of you NJCPA current folks out there, join the Emerging Technologies Interest Group at njcpa.org/groups. Also, thank you all so much, and I'll see you all next time.